Hey guys, I'm here in Washington, D.C., home of democracy and home of some of the weirdest music I've ever heard.
The go-go capital of the world, Washington, D.C.
But something a little weirder than the music that I've noticed here has been the license plates. And I know that may seem odd, but they're all adorned with the phrase, "End taxation without representation." So why, in the heart of democracy, do they have a Revolutionary War slogan on their plates? It's because the District of DC has some of the weirdest legal restrictions in all of the country. Washington, D.C. is something in between a state and a territory. It's what's known as a federal district, meaning that the federal government has unanimous power over the area here. This was set up in the Constitution in order to protect the seat of power. You see, previously in the Articles of Confederation, there was no federal militia, and so they were reliant on the states to protect them in cases they did not. And so in the Constitution, it was written that Congress would have complete power over this area. In 1980, the Congress finally gave the district home rule, meaning that they were able to elect council members and mayors and set their own policy. But with one big catch. They were forced to submit their budget to the federal government for approval. And what has occurred now is a game of political football with the district as the field. So while Congress usually doesn't just outright deny the district's budget, instead what they do is add amendments and riders play to their political base. And the district is one of the best places to play political games. With no constituents, representatives receive zero backlash. The district doesn't have any representation in the Congress. They don't have a voting member in the House. All she's allowed to do is vote in committee. One of the biggest examples we have of this political gaming was in 2011, as Republicans played brinkmanship with the federal budget. One of their concessions that Democrats gave was funding for low-income abortions here in the city. And this was a massive win for the pro-life community, while Washingtonians hated it. And this lack of political representation, no doubt, has real-world consequences. One of the biggest was the district's fight over needle exchange programs. In the 80s and 90s, the Washington, D.C. had one of the highest rates of HIV and AIDS. And what they wanted to do about it was start a needle exchange program, something not uncommon in big cities. But the Congress denied it. And for tens of years, they weren't allowed to implement this program that has been shown to reduce rates of HIV. Until finally in 2007, where the bill was reversed and the district immediately started the needle exchange program, which saw the number of HIV AIDS cut in third within the next 2 years. One of the strangest battles the district has had to fight is over weed legalization. In 2014, the district passed a ballot measure with an almost 2/3 majority to legalize weed. But in the Congress, when passing the budget, an amendment was added that banned the district from putting any money towards weed legalization. So now what exists is a very bizarre gifting economy. What this is a faux economy where you pay someone for a separate item and then they gift you the weed. So while it's decriminalized, you're still buying black market drugs. But the district's lack of control extends beyond the policymaking institution. It also extends into the executive. I think that John Oliver puts it best in this clip.
With that level of restriction, the Mayor of DC gets to run the city the way a student council president gets to run her high school. Oh, sure, Kelsey, pick the theme for prom, but we'll control the budget and Eyes Wide Shut is not an acceptable theme.
One of the most salient examples we have of this took place right here in Lafayette Square. This is the spot during the summer of 2020 protest where peaceful protesters were pushed, pepper sprayed, and battered out of the way to make way for Trump to give a live outside address. And the district wanted to take a different approach. They had a completely different idea of how they wanted to handle the situation, wanting to take a passive, less provocative approach. But the federal government stepped in, and the opposite occurred. Another issue that the mayor had was during the January 6th insurrection. For weeks beforehand, the district knew that this was going to be an important date, and they wanted to call more troops. But they had none. The district doesn't have a militia of their own, and their police force is very small. They're forced to rely on the federal troops here in the city. So even on the day of, when protesters were turning into insurrectionists, the mayor was forced to sit back and watch as the district went through one of its worst days ever. There have been multiple pushes to give DC representation, one of which came in 2009 and was killed in one of the most devious ways. The DC Voting Rights Act, which aimed to give DC a single voting member in Congress, had an amendment added onto it that if the bill were to pass, DC would also have to repeal all their gun legislation. Needless to say, the same people who wanted representation for DC decided they had to kill the bill for the better of the district. One avenue for representation is statehood, and this is something that is massively popular. Within DC, it's something like 80% of people support it, and it recently passed in 2021 in the House, but died in the Senate. It's something that has massive Republican opposition because if DC were to become a state and have 2 senators, they would be reliably blue, changing the balance of power. Republicans have gone so far in opposition to any form of DC representation as to claim to want to end home rule if they were to take back the Congress in 2022. Now, the fate of the district is as up in the air as their laws and their police seem to be.